The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pat Maroney from Rugby, New Jersey, and we have Karen Fong Donahue, who's going to give the presentation about college rugby admissions. I would just first like to remind everybody that this weekend we have the college fair on Sunday and the combine, which will be the start of our high performance program for 2016. So right now we have 23 people in attendance, and I'm sure we'll get another few people over the next couple of minutes. But I'm going to hand over to Karen for her to do her introduction. If at any time during the webinar you want to ask a question, if you look in the chat window, you can see that you can type there. And you can ask Karen questions as we go along. Plus, there will be a specific question and answer section at the end of the webinar for you to ask more in-depth questions. So I'm going to hand over to Karen, and I'll talk to you later.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me and, joining everyone else here. We're all going to go through a lot of information tonight when it comes to college rugby. So without further ado, I want to make sure to just jump right in because we do have a ton of information to go over in this next hour. And, as Pat, mentioned, please, as we're going along, if there are questions, please go ahead and type in that chat box some questions. Also want to make sure, nice big thank you to Rugby New Jersey for organizing this. I'm really excited that I get a chance to, give you some background information prior to your big combine and college fair this weekend. All right, so we are going to continue to move forward. Before I jump right in, I just want to make sure that I also give another special thanks to some of my supporters. These are some companies that, really believe in what I'm doing in terms of, guiding student athletes and families towards playing and studying in college. So Arbor Bridge is my preferred test prep company, and a lot of the downloads and handouts actually are provided from them in terms of some great tips and strategies about test prep. Skins is my preferred compression wear when I was a player and also as a referee when I'm doing a lot of travel. I definitely don't go anywhere without my recovery skins. Those are my favorite. Rugby Athletic provides all of our great apparel. Atavis, has been very supportive of what we're doing, and obviously they put on tons of high performance camps and clinics year round. And then Impact Custom Mouth Guards does some great work. These are dental grade custom mouth guards that students and teams can customize them with their school colors, their number, their logo, things like that. So I think when I was a player, I would have loved to have a chance to have a cool looking mouth guard like this that's also really thin profile, so that when I was a player, I wouldn't have had to take it out in order to call my play or anything like that. I could keep it in and breathe and talk. So want to make sure as well. So special thanks to those guys. A little bit about me, in case you've never met me at an event. I've been a professional college consultant since 2009. I actually have my master's and school counseling credential, so I've been working in education for many years now. This is, my full-time job. So I spend 100% of my time focusing on college and specifically college rugby, helping families understand how we can use rugby to increase college admissions, scholarship, and all of those pieces in such a competitive world right now. I was also a player. I was a collegiate All-American in 2002 from UC Davis in California. I was also a part of the USA Rugby U23 national team. I was in the national team pool for 7s and 15s from 02 to 04. Recently, I have been a B-panel referee. And then I'm also the USA Rugby High School All-American Academic Advisor. And, just to give you a little background, how, the company Rutgers Edge came about, because I get that question quite a bit. It was really kind of this perfect storm of blending, what I was doing professionally in terms of college consulting and, kind of every single weekend going out and refereeing either college games. There's a picture in the back. You can see me. I'm refereeing USC versus Arizona State. So I'm refereeing these college level games, along with high school games. And I started really, organically becoming the go-to person. Families started knowing that this is what I did, and I started getting lots of questions. My son wants to play rugby at the next level, what is a good college to go to? Hey, I've heard that, these programs are offering scholarship. Is that true? How do we go about getting that? And all these types of questions really led to, me, growing Rutgers Edge to make sure we get to answer these questions. There's lots and lots of high school players just like you out there playing. I want to make sure you guys walk away from this event, just having all the information you can, so that hopefully you can, continue moving forward in those next coming years playing at that next highest level. I am now recently, I was in California. Most families know me from being in California. Recently, my husband and I did move to Denver, Colorado, so we are out here now. And there's just a little picture. I did also have a baby girl. That's Liberty right there. That's my husband, Troy, who's also a rugby player. So we're really excited to have her as part of the family. My husband is a prop, so we're pretty certain she'll probably end up being a flanker at some point. So about the Rutgers Edge, so since we have started, we've, myself and some of my associates, we've been written or featured in these publications here to the right. We presented to many state-based unions, as well as many teams. I was just in Texas, presented to 2 high schools, as well as for Rugby Texas. And really, I get the question a lot: what do we do? Our main business model is working with families one-on-one, offering personalized advising. We also do group seminars like this, and also provide consulting for college programs. Those are just some examples at the bottom of where many of our students have ended up. So big college powerhouses there, in terms of Cal, Dartmouth, Lindenwood, Arizona, UCLA. Those are a very small slice of where a lot of my students end up, and I'm always very proud of each and every single one of them. All right, so my goals for this evening, I want to make sure to help you understand the college rugby landscape, and then also how to boost your or your child's competitive advantage. I know we have some student athletes on the line, as well as some parents, so I want to make sure that we help you guys get whatever it is you need out of this seminar. Okay, so our agenda, we're going to talk about the college rugby landscape. We're going to talk about what rugby scholarship is, what does it look like, how do you get it, things like that. Critical steps for all players, things that I think you should definitely be doing now. And then again, as Pat mentioned, we're going to do a question and answer. Okay, so right off the bat, I want to make sure that families really understand what college rugby looks like here in the U.S. Okay, so as of fall 2015, these are the numbers, and I think just by the numbers, a lot of families, when they first come to me, they're really surprised, or when they see the slide, they're surprised how many teams there really are, on both the men's side and the women's side. I think typically when a family might first come to me and they say, okay, we're interested in a couple schools, they might know off the top of their head kind of the heavy hitters. They might know maybe 20, 25 programs, but beyond that, they're not really sure. And this is where I really encourage, every player out there and family to throw the net open really wide. I mean, if you hear from a family that says, I really only want to play Division I, you've got 161 men's teams to choose from that play in some version of Division I. On the women's side, you have almost 100. Now, I do want to point out that, those divisions, they will change, and this is partially because college rugby in the U.S. is really new, right? So compared to mainstream sports like football and basketball and things like that, they've been around much longer. Those conferences and divisions have been established. So what's happening with college rugby, and USA Rugby is doing their best here, is trying to make up conferences and divisions, and a lot of times they're playing catch up, because as teams continue to get better and they want to move up, or teams decide, this year we didn't do as well and they're going to move down, we always do have to be able to be flexible and kind of arrange it to what's going to best fit those schools. Something that's very different about the way college rugby is set up versus, again, those mainstream sports is each of these schools can choose what division they're going to be in. So for example, you see there on your slide, you've got, some colleges that are in Division II, let's say, for example. They potentially could play Division I, but theoretically in their region, it's possible that there are no other teams close by that play Division I. So, from a funding standpoint, it doesn't make any sense for them to go, spend tons and tons of money every weekend, flying or driving to play another D1A or D1AA team, where, if every other team around them is Division II, it makes more sense for them to stay in Division II. So, I just want to make sure that you all understand that, just depending on what division a team is in doesn't necessarily always point to, whether or not a team is the best or the strongest. There are teams that are certainly that compete in small college, which is National Small College Rugby Organization, or NSCRO, which actually used to be a combination of USA Rugby's Division 3 and 4. So that's why I put Division 3 there, so you would know that those are comparable programs. But there are teams that choose to be in NSCRO, even if honestly they really could play Division 2. So again, it goes back to, the schools are making their own individual choices about what conferences and divisions they want to be in. I do want to point out that USA Rugby Division 1 row right there where it says D1 Elite, that is actually just for the women. So the women, and this was just this year, they announced they're going to have a D1 Elite. They used to not have that. So again, always changing with rugby. It's really exciting. It's really fun. So again, I fully expect this slide to probably change in the next couple months, in the next year. So obviously just stay tuned, okay? Any questions about this? I'm just going to give it a second in case anyone has questions. Okay, we're going to move on. If you think of something, go ahead and type it in that chat box. All right. Men's rugby, and you see here at the very top, non-NCAA. Okay, so one of the things that really, again, makes rugby in the U.S. very different is that no rugby in the U.S. for men, okay, I'll talk about women in a second, follow NCAA compliance guidelines. Okay, so again, we go back to the fact that when you look at a USA Rugby D1A school, it doesn't mean that that school, the other sports, are also D1. So, a good example, might be off the top of my head, you might have, let's say, Middlebury. Okay, so Middlebury College, they, typically in their mainstream sports are not Division I, but for their rugby, they are. So, if you were to say, I only want to play at a Division I school, if you were looking up NCAA terms, that school wouldn't come up. So rugby really develops their own divisions and conferences, again, based on what is necessary and what schools opt to do. So again, for the men, you have the D1A, D1AA, Division II, and then NSCRO. That's in regular season play, all right? And then what you're going to find is, again, teams always have lots of choices about what postseason they want to do, okay? So now we've got teams, and you see here in the picture right here in the very background, you see Cal and you see ASU. So in a regular season, they might put together their own independent schedule. And what they do is they'll play in a Pac-12 tournament, okay? So they've decided to put together their own conference. They're going to play each other. And then the postseason, they might decide to go in separate terms. So some of those schools in that Pac-12 are going to go towards a USA Rugby national championship. Okay, and those are always in May, and they'll have a D1A national championship, a D1AA national championship, and a D2 national championship, which is a reason why you're going to hear many, many teams say, we are the national champions, because there's many, okay? NSCRO also has their own national championship, and also national champions in 15s and in 7s. So there's, again, various, groups of national champions in there. Cal is part of the group, and ASU is as well. Postseason, they actually don't go to a USA Rugby Championship. They're going to participate in the Varsity Cup. And with the Varsity Cup, it is an invitational postseason. So Varsity Cup is probably the most well-known postseason outside of a USA Rugby National Championship. They're going to include teams like Cal, as I mentioned, BYU, ASU, Central Washington, Dartmouth, University of Utah, UCLA, Army West Point, Clemson, to name a few. Okay, so they will play their own postseason and they will compete for their Varsity Cup National Championship. At the same time, other teams are also competing for a USA Rugby Championship. The sevens version of Varsity Cup is the CRC, which many of you guys may have already been to, which is in Philadelphia. Again, that's an invitational sevens tournament, which the finals are televised on NBC. Now, a lot of other regions are also foregoing all of that, okay? And they're going to say, we just want to have a bowl championship. And really what that boils down to is, again, more regional. So especially in the Northeast, when you've got a lot of weather, a lot of travel issues and funding issues, you might find a group of teams that are going to say, you know what, we don't have the money, we don't want to, travel from, Vermont all the way to California for these championships. It doesn't make any sense. We're going to go ahead and stick locally and just have a bowl championship. And you will have teams that will say, we are the bowl champions for this region. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, I am going to keep going. And by the way, this PowerPoint is going to be available in the handout slide for you to download. So if any of these you want to go back to, you can. All right. So I'm going to go over this briefly for the women's rugby. There's really a very small handful of teams that do follow NCAA or NAIA compliance. So if we have any parents of female players, coaches of female players, you can make sure that they're aware if they're looking at these schools that are, on here, Dartmouth College, Harvard, Sacred Heart, American International, they do follow NCAA regulations. So it means that you got female players that want to do this, they actually have to follow all those same guidelines, meaning they have to register with the Eligibility Center, they have to ensure that they've taken the core classes, gotten the GPA, send their test scores to the NCAA or NAIA, all those steps as if they were being recruited for one of the mainstream sports like soccer or basketball. So again, you can always go back to this slide, but just so you know, the women's rugby does, because they're an emerging NCAA sport, they do have a little bit more oversight from NCAA for many of these teams. Okay, any questions about this? All right, we're going to keep on going. Okay, so one of the questions I get all the time is really, what is the difference between varsity and club? Is one better than the other? And this very basic pie graph, I want you all to kind of at least visually see, what does the makeup really look like here in the U.S. Now, the majority of teams in the U.S. Oh, sorry, someone just wrote something on here. The main difference here is that the majority of teams are club. Okay, first thing I want to tell you, club does not mean it's bad. Okay, there's many club teams that are phenomenal. So St. Mary's College is a phenomenal men's club team. Clemson University is a men's club team, and I'm going to define that for you in a minute. But again, I want you to understand that club doesn't mean it's worse than varsity or club varsity, anything like that. Okay, the main difference when you hear a team say that they're varsity, it simply means that they're, a couple things. The team itself falls under the school's athletics department, their intercollegiate athletics department. It means they're going to fall under the same oversight as all the other sports that the school oversees. So typically it means they're going to, be in the same offices as, volleyball, soccer, water polo, swimming, track and field, things like that. Most varsity teams, it means you're going to get all the amenities that are associated with those mainstream sports. So you will have typically, paid staff, so head coaches, assistant coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, physios, trainers that travel with you that are at every practice. You're going to get, film sessions, where you have mandatory study sessions. You might have early registration for classes so that you don't have trainings that interfere with courses. All of those things that you associate when you think about collegiate sports, that is what a varsity program would have. So examples of varsity programs include like Furman University in South Carolina, American International College. Cal is obviously a very good example of a varsity program. Wheeling Jesuit is another one. Okay. Now there's a kind of little slice of white, and that is kind of the program style that I believe is growing right now, and it's called club varsity or varsity club. So you can kind of use those interchangeably. Really, what that means, it's showing this kind of gray zone where you are going to have more club programs that get maybe a couple of the amenities of the varsity programs, but not all, or they're not going to have to follow what the intercollegiate athletics department is telling them to do. So a good example of club varsity would be Penn State. So Penn State's program is club varsity. They have access to many of the varsity features. They have paid staff. They have dedicated, playing in facilities and fields and things like that, but they're not considered a varsity sport on campus. They don't have access to scholarship, which, by the way, varsity teams tend to be the ones that are going to have scholarship money, although not all of them. Okay, but club varsity tends to mean that they're not going to. Okay, so when we go back to, is one better? I really can't tell you. When I work with a family, which one is better for Joey is not going to be the one that's better for Joe, right? Every player is very different depending on what they're looking for in a school. Do they need scholarship? What position do they play? What kind of school do they want to go to? Some students I've come across, they'll tell me flat out, look, I'm not going to be a professional rugby player. I want to continue to play at a high level, but I also want to, have a college experience. I want to be in a fraternity or sorority. I want to have a job. I want to be more involved in campus. I don't want rugby to be my life. So that will sometimes define what program is a good fit. Okay, any questions about this slide?
Hi, Karen. We just have one question, which is we have a parent who has a son who's an 8th grader, and she's wondering how much do you think the landscape will change by the time he graduates high school?
Oh, wow, that is really exciting. That's a great question. I think it's going to change a lot. I do think there's going to be a growing number of club varsity where you have club teams that start, kind of building a reputation for themselves on campus, and then schools will take notice. If a rugby program is bringing them national recognition, if they are helping them retain students on campus, if they're helping them recruit students on campus, I do think you're going to see definitely that club varsity side growing, where maybe that yellow piece is going to shrink a little bit. And I also think the varsity side is going to grow as well. I think not as quickly, because obviously when you turn a team from club to varsity, there's lots of moving parts. I think the administration and the school has to back it. But I mean, even today, literally February 17th, I got a call today, and you guys are the first to know this, that Thomas More College in Ohio, they are going to be announcing a varsity program starting this fall. So if there's any juniors and even seniors that are on the line, they are actually putting together their material. They're going to send them to me this month, and I'm going to help them blast that out. But that is going to be a varsity program with scholarship money, with support. The reason being for that, the president of that college just came from Notre Dame College, which successfully has pulled off a varsity women's and men's program, and they saw kind of the benefit of doing that, what rugby really brought to that school. So now they want to bring it to Thomas More. So I do think that I think if you've got an 8th grader now, I mean, I can only imagine, and I think it's only going to be more positive. I think there's going to be a lot of great stuff, for your son. So hopefully that answered the question. Okay, I'm going to move on unless there's any other questions, Pat. Okay. So this is the piece that I think a lot of families find really helpful in terms of, again, finding the best fit. And this is something I spend a lot of time when I'm working with a student about, if I help a student end up at college, I want to make sure that not only is the academic program a good fit, but really the rugby program is a good fit. So I tend to rate programs in terms of not so much that varsity club, that piece, but really about how competitive a program is, or in other words, how much time commitment would a student athlete have to expect if they're on these certain teams. So again, we go back to, I would say the majority of teams in the US are going to be in this social column. Okay, and on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say it's about a 1 to 5. Okay, and typically social teams, like Lehigh University is a good example. They, they field a team. They historically have had one for a very long time. They practice, 2 days a week. They have a great go of it on Saturday. That's about it. They have a lot of players that show up that just walk on. They may, played soccer or football or some other sport, in high school, show up at college and decide, hey, let's just try a new sport. So you are, tend to see at those social teams, a lot of players with maybe not a lot of rugby experience. You might have lots of volunteer coaches and, even player coaches. I've seen more of those in the social bracket. But again, this is a great fit for students that, I had a student that, was definitely going to be an engineering major. And at, let's say we're looking at a school like Lehigh, maybe he wants to go to a top engineering program and is willing to say, what, I want to keep playing, but I don't need to dedicate 20-25 hours a week to rugby. I really only want to dedicate, maybe that 8 to 10. Okay, so that's where the social bracket really is. Now in the middle, you're going to start seeing us, obviously increase the amount of time you're going to dedicate, to a team. So competitive programs, anywhere from 6 to 8. Okay, and competitive programs are really kind of upping the ante, right? You're going to potentially have one paid coach. Maybe it's not paid for by the school, maybe it's paid for by alumni. You might have dedicated fields, you might have practices, 3-4 times a week, you might have a captain's mandatory workout session a couple days a week, things like that. You're looking at a competitive program where your commitment level of the team, now instead of 8 to 10, you're probably looking at anywhere from 12 to 15 hours. Again, longer preseason, you also might have a longer season in general because you might be going after 7 season on top of 15s, you might have playoffs, championships, things like that. So again, that does cut into your academic time. If you're traveling a lot, you're going to have to make sure that you can't, turn in your papers on time. You'll have to make sure you turn them in early, things like that. So a lot of students I know that start moving up this ladder into the competitive or the high performance bracket. A lot of time management, begins to play a really big role, because as your rugby starts to take over a bigger chunk of your life, the academic pieces, you really have to have a good balance of that. And the last piece here, high performance teams, I personally don't think there are that many. I would say there's probably anywhere from 10 to 15 at any given time that I would actually say are high performance in that 9 to 10 scale. High performance to me are programs where you have players that are dedicated to this team anywhere from, now we're looking 25 to 35 hours a week. So it almost is a job, right? It's almost a full-time job where you're really dedicating yourself to rugby. And quite honestly, you have to really know how to balance your time. I have some students that are at some of these high performance programs, and something they'll say right off the bat is, wow, like I had no idea that I would have to, schedule out my days, to the minute. From waking up at a certain time, because then we're going to have a team breakfast, and then, we're going to have a team meeting, and then we're going to have strength and conditioning. Then I go to one class, then I have an afternoon session, then we have a film session. I mean, there's so much time that you're building around rugby that it does possibly change the makeup of your college experience. So obviously good examples of high performance programs. In my mind, I think you're looking at, the Penn States, the West Point Army program, I think Dartmouth, I think Cal, UCLA, schools of that nature. Okay, any questions about this?
So we've one more question,
Okay.
Karen. This is from Simon Perry, and he's wondering, do you think we'll see sevens becoming as popular and as prominent at the collegiate level as 15s, especially after the Olympics?
That's a really great question. Okay, so I have two thoughts on this. I would love to see sevens grow, after the Olympics, but I think at the same time, kind of being in the rugby community for a long time, I think the kind of old guard about rugby is going to guard 15s quite heavily, and I think a lot of players normally get into rugby, typically, okay, and I'm just saying broadly, in college on 15s, 15 style. I think most college programs, you're always going to have 15s, possibly have sevens. You rarely have it where a college program has sevens and doesn't have 15. So you typically right now, which is funny because I think sevens is potentially, if you're just starting out with a team, sevens might be easier. You have to carry less players. Maybe the training is a little bit easier because there's just less bodies on the field. But 15s is kind of the go-to, right? Every college program, if they have one at all, they are starting with 15s. It'll be interesting to see what happens after the Olympics. I think the programs that already have very strong sevens programs, they will continue to probably invest more money into those programs, seeing that some of their players are continuing on the national team and getting again that recognition for their school. So when you start seeing players coming out of, let's say, Davenport University, or coming out of Dartmouth, and they're going to be in the Olympic team, right? So like Madison Hughes is a great example. He's bringing lots of recognition back to Dartmouth that they have now invested a lot more time and energy into a sevens program along with their 15s because the college is really respecting that and they really see it. I don't know if that answers your question. Hopefully so. Okay. I'm gonna move on, but if you have
Sorry, Karen. I've
Okay.
one more question.
No?
This you might want to keep this till the end, but so we have a mother whose son plays tackle now, and he's an 8th grader, and he wants to try football. He currently wrestles, and his mother is wondering, should she steer him towards rugby and wrestling for scholarship money and away from football? And is this an unsafe gamble?
Good question. Okay, so a couple ways to look at this. Number one, I think I will point out that most wrestlers that I know turn into fabulous rugby players. I've actually always seen lots of amazing rugby players with a great background in wrestling. So I do think wrestling is very complementary of rugby, and actually, obviously so is American football to some extent. I think you might want to look at numbers. So two things. If we're really looking at scholarships, if we're looking at full ride scholarships, which I know I'm going to get into in the next couple slides, that's really what your goal is. Your chances are higher with football. And the reason being, Division I and Division II football, they only offer full ride scholarships. So I would be completely lying to you if I said, no, stick with rugby, that's where you're going to get the most money. If you're really talking about athletic scholarship money, you're going to get way more when it comes to, NCAA supported sport on all these college campuses with football and also with wrestling. Now, wrestling is a little bit different. Most of those teams operate on an equivalency style, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But you still potentially are going to get more money, and again, you have wrestling at more schools that are maybe name brand than you do with rugby. I think the difference comes down to, and we can talk about this a little bit more as well. You think about the pool of players, though. I think at last count, you have anywhere from, I think it's like 1.5 million high school football players, where that are also going after these types of scholarships. Where from rugby, you really have less than 50,000. So if you look at those numbers, your chances of, and I'm going to talk about what programs, have scholarship money, potentially is, it's a little bit easier just because the ratio is less. There's just not as many rugby players out there going for these types of scholarships. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think you have to weigh a couple things. And my best guess as a recommendation for an 8th grader is definitely, for your son, to think about what sport he wants to pursue, less about the scholarship piece. I think if he really wants to, play football and rugby and wrestling, he should do it. I mean, I think there was just a study recently that, all of your top athletes were multi-sport athletes. So hopefully he's doing things for him and not necessarily for college, because I do think those pieces will work themselves out. But I think if you, guide too much of this with college scholarship as that's the ultimate goal, it may not always work out in that favor. Okay, hopefully that answers your question. Okay, we're going to move on, and then again, we'll definitely have time to go over any other questions you guys might have. All right, so let's talk about scholarships, right? Everyone wants to, talk about money, because obviously we all know, and I pointed out I have a daughter, and I can't even tell you how much it scares me now to think about, how much money it's going to take to send her to college, in, whatever that is, wow, 17 years, right? So I think it's really important. This is a huge factor when we think about what is a good fit for your child. And I think it tends to be something that gets overlooked is really the financial piece. So what I'm talking about here in terms of scholarship is non-need-based financial aid. Okay, that's something completely separate that we're going to separate out from this slide. Okay, so rugby scholarships, those are monies that are directly set aside from a rugby program for a player specifically for their talent. So a good example of this, Notre Dame College, American International, Furman, those are examples of programs that have scholarship money that they're able to dole out to players. Now, the way they work it out is they're going to have X amount of money. Okay, so and I'm throwing this number out, let's say each program has $100,000 a year to give out in a rugby scholarship. This is what the equivalency model is, what I was talking about earlier. It means, if I am Coach Sean Roberts at Furman University, could I give 4 $25,000 scholarships to 4 deserving players? I could, but potentially it makes more sense for me to split up that $100,000 into even smaller chunks, right? I might give Joey 10,000. I might give another student, 30,000. I might give, Max 10,000. And because, I know that Alex down the road has an amazing academic profile, he doesn't even need rugby scholarship. He's going to get merit scholarship. So then I'm not going to give him any money because I know he's going to get in and get money elsewhere. So these coaches really have they have their own ability to decide how to split up those scholarships. Rugby scholarships tend to be rather small. They can range anywhere from, today I know University of Kentucky announced that they gave out 3 rugby scholarships. Each were about $1,500. So they can be fairly small, that $1,500 all the way up to, $15,000, $20,000. Okay. The second piece of scholarship that almost every single student, family out there, I don't want you to overlook, is a merit scholarship. So these are not loans. These are merit scholarships based on a student's GPA, test scores, so SAT or ACT, and also things like leadership, character, and experience, and kind of their background. So you can see there on the slide it has $3 signs because the most money that a student I've ever seen get is merit scholarship. Okay, they're really going to get the most money if they do well in the classroom, more than if they're doing all the hard work on the rugby pitch, right? I have, every single year I work with the high school All-American team, and we have some amazing rugby players, amazing talent. But if their academic profile isn't there, there isn't much we can do. We might be able to find them a school where you're going to get $9,000, $10,000 a year, discounted off the cost. But if the total cost of the school is $50,000, they're still looking at a big chunk of money. Okay, so merit scholarship is really where it's at. Every year I see many very bright rugby players go to a great college, full ride academic merit scholarship. Okay, the third piece of scholarship this is again maybe where that growing trend is. Many more rugby teams have alternate scholarship, and this is going to come in the form of things like alumni scholarship. So that University of Kentucky program I mentioned, they have alumni scholarship. University of South Carolina, that's another one. They have this alternative scholarship, which is they've set up an endowment with their alumni, and they are giving out scholarships to players. Other alternate scholarships come in the form of in-state tuition. Idaho State is a good example. Let's see, Arkansas State, Central Washington, they can get you a tuition discount. So those are all ways that these teams, potentially can really, really discount your total cost of college, but it may not come in the form that families are originally thinking, right? They're thinking, I want to be recruited, or I want my son or daughter to be recruited and get scholarship for their athletics, but really it's coming in a different way. Now, in a perfect world, you're going to stack, 2 or 3 of these types of scholarships, and that is where you do see students and families getting, that full ride that they're hoping for, right? You're going to stack a rugby scholarship with some merit scholarship, and then on top of that, maybe an alternate scholarship. And then you are going to see more of that. Any questions about this before I move on? I know this is always a big slide and a lot of questions here. Okay, I guess I answered everything. All right, I'm going to continue to go on. Now, this last piece right here, admission influence versus input, I think this is also, at least for me, something Pat and I were just talking about before the webinar started. This, I think, is a really exciting piece about rugby. Now, I'm not saying money isn't important, because obviously it is, but I think some students come into this process a little too focused on where can I get the money? Can I get a rugby scholarship? When I get inquiries, that's probably one of the first things that student athletes ask. Where can I get rugby scholarship? And obviously there's a handful of teams that we can do this with, but really where you're seeing where I think rugby is providing a lot of value for families is the ability to influence admission. And these are very competitive colleges where, if you're a straight academic admit, your child may have no chance of getting in, right? So for example, let's say we're looking at UCLA, right? And you've got over 80,000 students applying. What are the chances that your child's going to get in? Regardless of whether or not they're an amazing student, with great test scores, the chances are still slim just because of a numbers game, right? So when you have a coach at UCLA, like Scott Stewart, who is able to provide some input with admissions. It means he's got a relationship with admissions. He can turn in a list of players and he can flag them and say, look, I've verified these students. I think they would add a lot to our team and to the UCLA community. That is going to help exponentially, right? It's going to help a student stand out above some others that maybe didn't have someone else advocating for them. So there is a difference, though, between input, which is what I discussed with UCLA. They can just simply advocate for a student, but there's no guarantees, versus there are programs that tend to be varsity programs that have admission influence. And influence means that they flat out have spots or slots or tags, however you want to call it, with admissions. So a good example of admission influence, would be, let's say, Furman, which we've talked about, Cal. Those schools have a direct link with admissions where they can say, hey, as long as these students meet the minimum, requirement, these are the kids we want admitted, and admissions pretty much will admit those students. So, I think when you look at, for example, you are looking at a school like Cal, which is, an amazing, public university, where the acceptance rate there is also really, really low. I think the ability to get admitted there is, as they say, that's their scholarship. So they don't offer any scholarship, but what they're going to say is, we will get you an acceptance into one of the most competitive colleges in the world. Any questions about this before I move on? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Okay, so let's talk about some steps for players, okay? And this is, I've been doing this for a few years now, and, every single week I sit down and I talk to many coaches and I ask them, what are the things you wish players would do or wouldn't do? How can a player help stand out amongst other players, as rugby recruiting continues to grow, right? Whether or not they're looking for money, whether or not they're looking for some input or admission help, here are some things that I really think is important for players and families to be aware of. So on the academic side, okay, so grades, obviously, we start talking about how you get the most money. We know it's with merit, so grades, that is where it starts, okay? The higher the better. So, really, I would aim for anything from 3.0 and above. When you start getting into the 3.5, 3.7 range, obviously, much better chances, and you get more options the higher your grades are. I just met with a family yesterday, and something to point out, there are many student athletes that, might have a rough freshman year, or something like that. And this student, did have a rough freshman year. You start seeing, his grades tick up sophomore year, and now in the junior year, they're really turning up, right? And they wanted to know, will a college look at that? And yes, every single college is going to respect an upward trend. So I definitely want to encourage, any student out there that, if you had a rough, first year or semester or something like that, it's never too late to continue to work harder. And if colleges see that you've kind of turned on and you're now focused on grades and improving yourself, that is always going to be really valued and respected. Okay. Rigorous curriculum. So this is taking a little bit in context though here, because obviously, if you go to a high school that doesn't offer any AP or honors courses, this may not apply to you. But definitely, I think if you're going to a high school that offers, either AP, honors, IB, something to that degree, from a college standpoint, every single admissions, counselor, they are aware of what your high school offers, so they would know. Okay, we're looking at an applicant from this high school. We know offers 26 APs, and this student only took 2. We're going to consider the students a little bit on the weaker side, or maybe isn't challenging themselves, because the typical student coming out of this high school does tend to take more APs or honors courses. So, my philosophy here is, I'm not going to tell every single student go out and, stack every single class with APs now, but I do think if there are certain subjects that a student is, very good at, that enjoys, if you've got a student that loves math and that school offers an honors pre-calculus class or, AP Calc, they're choosing not to take that, and they're taking instead, math analysis and then just regular statistics. It just points to maybe a weaker curriculum, possibly, maybe a lazier student, right? So I think rigorous curriculum and grades, those are tied together, okay? You want obviously top grades, but you need it also in a rigorous curriculum. You know, if you've got a 4.0 GPA and all the classes are kind of your straight classes, no APs or no honors, you're actually ranked a bit lower than students that, you know, have some APs and honors and might have a couple Bs in there. Okay. The last thing on the academic piece, you know, is really being well aware of testing. And I know that a lot of families are like, yes, we know. But something as it relates to rugby and recruiting, something I highly recommend is making sure that all of the testing is done by that summer between junior and senior year. Now, what this tends to do is it's going to push up the testing timeline. So if you've got a junior now and you're planning on taking that first SAT or ACT in June, I'd actually really advise you to try to slide that timeline up. You know, hopefully taking that first test as early as April, so you can take a second test if needed in May or June, and that hopefully allows you to have that entire profile ready by the summer. You know, a lot of the recruiting for these college programs are going to happen either over the summer or early fall. So what you don't want to do is depend on, okay, well, my son didn't do so well on that June test, that they're going to take it in, you know, October. By the time you get that test score back, it's going to be almost November, potentially too late. So, you know, definitely when it comes to, you know, whether or not a coach can help, having all your tests completed early is really helpful. One of the handouts that is included with this webinar is some handouts from Arbor Bridge about comparing that new SAT versus the ACT, also some timeline information. Every single recommendation I've heard from Arbor Bridge and also other test prep companies I know really is for juniors and sophomores, at least right now. The recommendation is really to stick with the ACT. The new SAT is just a little, you know, a little too new. You know, there's not enough curriculum out there. No one really knows how to prep for it. So a lot of companies that I know are really highly recommending the ACT. Okay. Any questions about these three pieces that I've just talked about?
Hi, Karen. So I do have a couple. One, what can I do to help my very average student get accepted into college?
Okay, so you know, okay, so a couple things. You got a very average student. And I guess when I think about a very average student, I'm thinking of students that, you know, maybe in that 2.0, 2.5 kind of range. You know, and I know lots of them, right? Just decent guys. You know, they're bright, but you know, maybe school isn't their thing. Now, let me point out a lot of what I'm talking about. These are strategies really geared towards those colleges that are probably more selective. And when I say more selective, probably looking at anywhere from, you know, 40% acceptance rate and lower. Now, the majority of colleges out there are actually much higher and much more open. So I think if the general question is, how can I help him, you know, my average student, get into a college? Number one, even if you've got an average student, there's still tons of colleges out there that will accept your student. So I do think that there's still options, you know. So a lot of colleges too will take into account the first semester of senior year. So again, always time to kind of turn it around. Also, there are, you know, even schools that will accept students probationary. So a good example, you know, at Lindenwood University, let's just say the student, you know, kind of is borderline on the GPA. They would actually accept a student on a probationary status, and they would say, look, we're accepting you, but your first semester you better have, you know, a C average, and if not, you're going to get kicked out. So there are still opportunities, you know, for students to go to college. Now, if it's an average student, you know, do I think they're going to get into a Dartmouth or Stanford? You know, probably not. You know, and just to give you some background, those types of schools, the reason they are very selective, you know, from their standpoint, they're saying, you know, we're looking at students and we're making sure we're accepting students we think are going to be successful here, that can handle our curriculum. So if we've got a student that's, you know, barely getting a 2.0 or something like that in high school, they're looking, you know, they're looking at it from the standpoint like, if we accept Joey, he's not going to last more than a month here. So that's kind of where that standpoint is. Hopefully I answered your question about that. You know, the other piece I'll mention is, I think for a lot of students that are maybe not that motivated about college and college planning, you know, to them, a lot of times when I first meet them, they're going to say, oh my gosh, why would I get excited about going to school for another 4 years? You know, to them, it, you know, if they haven't been through the process, it's just more school, right? And this is what they think. Oh, you know, I'm going to sit in class and listen to a lecture, you know, and subject I don't care about, and they're not excited. I might recommend, for you with your son, I always think it's great to do an official college tour somewhere local. If you've got a nice big college somewhere nearby over spring break this year, do a tour. I've seen a lot of students turn it around when they get on that campus and they look around and they hear about all the cool things they're going to get to do in college. These are the dorms you're going to get to live in. This is the food you're going to eat. These are the cool classes you're going to take. And I think that tangibly gives them something to hang on to. And then they'll say, wow, I want to go to that school. What do I need to do to get there? And then I think, again, it gives them that goal, right? It gives them a reason to hopefully, pick up their grades, maybe want to take on a more challenging curriculum, when they have something to shoot for. Okay, what's another question?
Okay, so this one is from Jordan Cowan, and he's a junior in high school, and he's wondering what's the best time to start reaching out to college coaches?
Good question. So it is rarely too early. I definitely think if you if on the line, if we have some freshmen and sophomores, I think if there's some schools you already know you're very interested in, it won't hurt you to, reach out to coaches or, kind of just, throw a feeler out there and just let them know who you are and that you're interested. I like to think that the most value you're going to get in reaching coaches tends to be about now, junior year, so right where you are, and after you've had at least one set of official testing, which is, again, why I think it's important to do that testing earlier rather than later, because a lot of these programs, if they're able to help you, one of the first obstacles they're going to come across is, even if I have that, admission influence, can the student be admitted? They still have minimum bars. They still need to make sure you have taken an SAT or ACT. So you help yourself a lot if you, have your first contact with a coach and you can say, hi, this is this is who I am. This is where I go to high school. This is my GPA. These are my test scores. I'm really interested in your program. And you'll see in one of the handouts, I do have an example of a rugby resume as well. And I think when you can attach a rugby resume that has all of your information on one sheet, that would be really helpful. So I do think reaching out anywhere from about now, on is probably the best time.
Okay, so I have one last question in this this session. So I have a student who's wondering, is it acceptable to negotiate scholarships between schools and coaches?
This is a good question. I think it obviously happens, okay? I think politically you have to be really careful. So let's say, for example, you've got, I'm making this up. Let's say Notre Dame College decides we're going to offer you $10,000, and then American International says we'll offer you $15,000. Best case scenario, you go back to Notre Dame College and you say, look, American International is going to offer me 15. Is there any way you can meet that? That would really help make my decision to go to Notre Dame, more positive for my family. It would really help us out. They can say yes if they really, really want you. They could also say no. They simply just may not have the money. So I don't know that I would say negotiating really works. It's not really like a car lot, right? It's really hard to say, well, this school's going to give me this, you have to give me this for me to go there. They might, but chances are they'll say, you know what, if that other college is going to give you that much money and that's what you really need, you should go there. I think it goes back to, there is a great saying that I heard from another wonderful college consultant many, many years ago, and he said, look, you have to make sure you know what your goals are, right? So if your goal is to get the most scholarship you can, you absolutely can do that, but you cannot pick the school where you get the scholarship or where you get recruited, right? You can't say, I want to play top level rugby and I want the most money, but it has to be at a school like X, Y, and Z. You might end up getting a school that's going to offer you the money, right, and get you a merit scholarship and get you all those pieces, but maybe from a school you've never heard of. So I think if you figure out what your goals are, that's really going to drive what your decision is. If your ultimate goal is scholarship, one school's offering you the most, I think you can try, but I also think you risk turning off another coach. They might say, look, I didn't, if you're more interested in money than actually coming to Notre Dame College to study here, good luck. And they might actually pull that scholarship offer. So I think before you even try to negotiate, I think you should be clear which school you actually want to go to first. Okay, I'm going to move on just because I know we are getting close to time, and I want to make sure we have a little bit of time at the end for some question and answer. Okay, all right. Again, the stronger academic profile, the more scholarship you're going to receive, okay? On the athletic side, proper communication with coaches, okay? I cannot stress this enough. You'd be surprised how many players out there communicate with coaches and they seem to forget that these are professionals, right? And they don't even say, dear Coach Smith, I'm really interested in X school, a lot of times what you'll end up seeing, so a couple pitfalls that we've seen, a student's going to send a mass email and they're going to include every single coach, either in a blind copy or all in the all in the 2 columns, so every coach knows who Joey is, reaching out to. No coach wants to feel like they're one of 50, right? So when you communicate with a coach, please make sure I'm emailing Coach Gary Lane at ASU, right? Not Gary Lane at U of A, right? University of Arizona, Arizona State are 2 different schools. Those 2 coaches tell me all the time they get communication from players that are talking about the opposite school. So Coach Duffy at Arizona will get an email from a student saying, I have always wanted to go to ASU. And if you can't proofread your communication and make sure it's the right coach, the right school, definitely getting deleted. Okay, also, please don't lead your communication with, text type language, and also, hey, I want a scholarship. If a school has scholarship, you can kind of let them bring it up. You do not need to lead with that. As soon as you open the door yourself with that, they know right off the bat that's what you're looking for. And most of these programs, they know it's important, but they want to make sure you want to come to the school, that you want to be coached by them, that you want to be part of that college community, not necessarily the scholarship. The other piece I want to bring up in terms of proper communication is the importance at this point. If there's a student athlete on here, if there's a parent, please understand that all the coaches now are taking a very deep look at social media. So just this week, I had a coach call me to tell me, and he actually showed me a picture of one of these students' Twitter accounts, and this student was, making comments and liking posts and things like that were really, really offensive. And this student was about to be recruited, to a specific school, and actually they pulled the recruitment. From the coach's standpoint, he said, I understand that, every person, has freedom of speech. You can say what you want, but if I'm going to recruit you to my campus and you're saying things like that, you are now potentially going to be a risk for my program, right? You are a representative of our school, you're a representative of our rugby program, and we don't want to put ourselves in that kind of poor position. So definitely share with your students, or if you're a student on here, if you do not want a coach, or you don't want your grandma to see something you're putting on Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, anything, just at this point you got to stop. Okay, you got to make sure that everything you put out there is representative of who you are. Okay, a Rugby resume, I already mentioned it's in your handout, so you can download that. I do think game film is becoming more important. Of course, most coaches would love to see you live, but since most coaching staff, it's really maybe a staff of 1. They're not flying around. They're not going to get to see this X high school playing that high school in New Jersey anytime soon. So I think if you're able to get game film, that's really helpful. Probably not only for you but for your team. If you can upload the full game film, on a Vimeo or YouTube. Again, include that link on your Rugby resume. That's really helpful. Last here, I do think camps and tournaments are becoming more important. So, again, seeing someone live is always the best, right? So if a school you're really interested in has a camp, you need to go. So good example, you really love Penn State, you need to go to the camp. You love Army West Point, you got to go to the camp. You love Lindenwood, you have to go to the camp. If a school doesn't offer a camp, many more of them are showing up at tournaments. So the big name tournaments, those regional cup tournaments are really big, Las Vegas, things like that. They will go to those. Those are good places to be seen and also to connect with these college coaches. Okay, any questions about this? Okay, I'm going to move on because we're almost done. These are just a list of some resources that I really recommend. We have a second edition Rutgers Edge Playbook. This is my comprehensive guide to college rugby. It includes all of my favorite lists, kind of an explanation of everything that we've gone over tonight, but obviously in more detail. It is in a workbook form, so hopefully students can go through it, together as a family, and you guys can go through the different steps, the things that I would recommend doing, as a student athlete to make sure that you maximize your options at the very end. The FIS Guide to Colleges is one of my favorites. My Bible. I think it's great to start researching colleges and finding out more about it. Colleges That Change Lives highlights 40 colleges that tend to be a little bit like hidden gems, ones you may not have heard of that historically have shown they have done wonderful things to really, change lives, right, from all of those students that are there. Collegeboard.org does have a search colleges engine that you can select from everything from location to size, how selective it is. You can also choose sports, so you can select rugby, and it will help you filter down that list. As you go into testing, as I mentioned, testing is a big part of scholarship. Number2.com is a great website for free test prep. I definitely think one of the worst things I see students do is go into those tests with no prep. A lot of them say, oh, I'll just show up on Saturday, see how I do. It really is like showing up to, your state final game with no practice, right? You need to do some practice. You need to be prepared, and have some knowledge about what's going to happen on the test for you to do well on it. We do have a newsletter, and I have a Facebook page where I post things as soon as I hear, any news about college rugby. We also have a Twitter account. So, make sure to connect with us. If it's okay with you, I'll probably ask Pat to connect me with all the emails if you pre-registered for this webinar, and I'll just add you to our newsletter list. If you don't want to be added, I will not be offended. You can always just hit the unsubscribe button and you'll be removed, okay? All right, so I'll probably spend, I know we're already at an hour now, so we'll spend another 5 minutes here answering some questions.
Okay, Karen, so then here's a good one from Kelsey Joyce. How do you register with the NCAA as a student athlete?
Good question. So how you register with the NCAA, if you just go ahead and Google NCAA Eligibility Center, you're going to come on their website and you're going to click a button that says student athlete. So there's like 3 different tabs. I think it's like athlete, counselor, and coach or something like that, right? So click the student athlete button, and then you're actually going to create a login. You'll just follow all those steps. There is a fee. I believe it's $75 or $80. So you will have to pay for that. And at that point, after you've registered, you go through all the different questions, you will get an NCAA number. That's the number that if you are working with any of the coaches that are NCAA, they will ask for that number. So they can only recruit students if it's an NCAA school. They can only recruit you if you have the NCAA number, because you become what's called an NCAA qualifier, which means you have met their minimum requirements for classes, GPA, testing, things like that. They want to make sure you're not a professional athlete. You're not getting paid to go to practice or games, and things of that nature.
Great. There were a couple of, sorry, hang on 1 second. We're getting some background noise.
Okay.
So we have had another couple of questions, but actually you've answered them all. So if anybody has any more questions, just type them into the question box now.
And if not, I want to make sure to say thank you. This is our email address here. If you have any extra questions you have, that is our direct line, 858-880-7325. If you are interested in working with me directly, I do work with families all over the world, and we do this by video conference. So, I am able to work, even if you don't live here in Colorado, I am able to work with you. And again, I think if you're a junior, I think this is a good time to start working with me, to start planning out, what an appropriate college list looks like. And also, if there are coaches that we need to start having you contact, that we make sure that we get that done sooner, rather than later. Again, all of this information, will be sent to you guys, or I hope it's available on the handout, so feel free to download that, in your own time.
Okay, just one quick last question. Sure. From Lisa. She asks, what about two-sport athletes?
Can she clarify a little bit about Lisa, what do you mean by two-sport athletes are great?
I am waiting for a response.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
I'm going to guess she means if you're trying to be recruited for two sports.
Everybody, so the handouts are in the, there's a handout panel on the right-hand side in the webinar. If you do not see the handouts there, I will follow up with an email to everybody who attended, and I'll put links to the handouts directly in there. Also, for people who weren't able to attend, we will post a recording of the whole webinar. Okay, so Lisa clarified it. She says football and rugby versus scholarship offers, which I think you may have touched on earlier as well.
Yes. So the first thing, I think, if you've got a two-sport athlete, if you're looking at recruitment, it's going to happen kind of in parallel. So they're not going to overlap. So the recruitment for rugby, again, that pool is much smaller. When you have true rugby recruitment, in the same fashion as football. Football recruitment is very, very different and definitely more structured, the way they're going to operate things when they have National Signing Day and letters of intent, all that kind of stuff. So football is totally separate. I think what you might get into is if you are, let's say, you're getting offered football scholarship money and you're getting rugby scholarship money, I think it depends on what division you're looking at from football and to compare those offers. But are they going to overlap or are they going to conflict? You can go after both types, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Like, you can start reaching out to football coaches. Now, remember, NCAA, they have very specific rules that coaches cannot contact, and I'm talking about football, soccer, things like that. They cannot contact players until after July 1st of their junior year. So you can always reach out to them, but they can't reach out to you. So there are some contact rules there that apply to NCAA sports that don't apply to rugby. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think if I didn't, you have my email address there. Please feel free to send me a quick email, and if you want to clarify a bit more, I can hopefully answer that for you.
Just we'll take this as the last question from Jordan. He's wondering, what season is rugby played in college? Do they play all year round? And if you play rugby in college, is it possible to play another sport?
Oh, that is a wonderful question. So the seasons are going to depend actually on the region. So for example, on the West Coast, obviously, really good weather, right? So if you're at a school, you're at Santa Clara, you're at University of San Diego, right? They will play more or less year round. You'll tend to play sevens in the fall, and then you'll have your regular 15 season, typically in this range, January to May. So they will play more or less year-round. When you get into the Midwest and the Northeast, you are going to tend to see more teams will do their full, quote, regular season of 15s in the fall. So Kutztown is a good example. They do almost all of their rugby in the fall because once winter hits, they don't have any access to any fields, right? It's not going to melt until, I don't know, April, May sometimes. So they really just focus on that fall season and then maybe moving into CRC May, June. Can you play another sport? It is possible. It depends which sport. So, for example, at Dartmouth, I know there are a couple rugby players there that play rugby and also run track. I think if you're at a school where the other sport, for example, is a scholarship sport, so if you're getting money for wrestling, if you're getting money for soccer, they probably won't let you play rugby because it's a risk, right? They don't want you to get hurt and then not be able to play the sport where you're getting scholarship money. I think a good question would be, as you're talking to these rugby coaches, you can ask, whether or not you're able to play another sport. I think if you're considering a varsity rugby program, if you're considering a high performance program, probably not, just because there's probably not going to be a lot of time to do another sport. But I think, if you love rugby, maybe, and you want to play another sport, you might then, it makes sense for you to look at, maybe a social rugby program, or maybe again a competitive program where you might find more balance, where you could play maybe a club soccer team and you can play rugby as well. Okay, so Pat, I think, did we say that was going to be the last question?
Yep, we did. Okay. So thank you, Karen. It's been absolutely superb. I've gotten a huge amount.
My web guy made that. I was carding someone.
We got a huge amount of thank yous to you in the questions. So everybody's, really, really appreciative of what you've done. So from all of the parents and athletes and Rugby New Jersey, thank you very much for your presentation tonight. I am sure you'll get lots of follows up. I know I'm going to send you a couple of emails because you've raised some questions. And I'd just like to remind everybody that about the Combine this Sunday and the College Fair this Sunday. If you look at the Facebook page of Rugby New Jersey, you'll see the extensive list of college coaches that are going to be in attendance. And if you want to go to the next level, this Combine is the way you get on the team that will go to the Regional Challenge Trophy. And those games this year are going to be played in West Point on June 18th and 19th. So it's going to be, if you want to be an All-American, this is the start of the process.
And sorry, I'm gonna interject one quick thing, Pat. If you're a student athlete or you have a child that's going to go to this Combine and meet coaches, I want to put it out there that, all these coaches, they really want to meet you. I talk to a lot of student athletes sometimes. They're really shy. They're like, oh, I don't want to go up to him or her, but really they can't help you if they don't know you. So you really got to get out of your shell. You've got to go up to, coaches, shake their hand, and put yourself out there, because, if you sit back, someone else who puts their hand up, they're the ones who are going to get the support. They're the ones who are going to get the help. So, please don't be shy. They really are very much, they're coming out to see you specifically. So be excited about that. I think everyone is really excited about the process. So hopefully you guys get out there, meet some great coaches, learn about programs, and again, really keep those options wide, right? Like, throw the net out. Don't consider a college and say, well, I've never heard of them, so I'm moving on. I think you'd be really surprised how many amazing colleges and rugby programs are really out there.
One of the things I would say is, my experience with some of my athletes, you see that there are certain colleges that are fashionable for students from certain schools. They may not be the schools that have good rugby programs, and they may not be the schools that are the right match for you. So it's really important to go into events like this with a really open attitude.
Yes. Oh, and sorry, I'm going to add one last thing. I definitely think as you're going down this road, something I really stress is when you're picking colleges, you want to make sure you're picking colleges operating on the broken leg rule, right? So we all play rugby. I've played rugby for 10 years. I've seen injuries, right? Everyone out there has seen someone broken collarbone, torn ACL, something. So you want to make sure you end up at a college that let's say, God forbid, something like that happens, right? You tear your ACL the first semester of college. Would you still want to be there, right? You really don't want to end up at a college where the only reason you're there is for rugby, because if that gets taken away, you still need to be able to, have the major that you want, have the people around you, the type of people that, you're going to be friends with, on campus. So you definitely think broken leg rule. I know it's a really negative way to look at it, but at the same time, we have to be realistic. We play a sport that has a lot of contact, and I've seen it happen every single year. Actually, I have many students, unfortunately, it could be something small, rolled ankles, twisted knees, something where they're out for 6-7 weeks. Hopefully they still really enjoy the school, or else, it's going to be a pretty miserable, first couple semesters.
Excellent. Thank you, Karen. So, thanks everybody for attending. The recording will be posted later. And thanks, Karen from Rugby New Jersey. We're really grateful that you came on and helped all our student athletes and parents.
All right. Take care, you guys. Hope to hear from you soon. Have a good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.